This is a guide to the edible and medicinal mushrooms and plants you can find in eastern North America. Make sure to positively identify any mushrooms and plants before you eat them. These layered mushrooms are a very flavorful edible mushroom. They are called Maitake or hen of the woods. They are often found at the base of oak trees, especially old-growth oaks. The mushroom's color ranges from gray to dark brown and has a white pore underside. The mushroom has a meaty texture and a strong earthy mushroom taste. They are great in cream sauces and thick soups. Black walnuts are the tennis ball looking fruits of the walnut tree. The husk has a distinctive citrus smell to them and ooze a black inky juice. The fruit is inedible, however the nut encased in the inner shell is edible. It can get messy to get to the shell because the walnut juice is a strong dye and it will turn your fingers dark. I always wear gloves to avoid staining my hands too much. A good hit from a hammer will smash the husk and you will be able to remove it from the shell. While the black walnut husk isn't edible, it's known for its anti-parasitic properties, so you might want to save them for herbal extractions. Unless you have a premium nutcracker, the shells of black walnuts can be difficult to break. You'll want a hard, precise hit from a hammer, but not too hard the nut meats go everywhere. Black walnuts have a stronger flavor than store-bought walnuts and are obviously a lot fresher. I like to store the walnuts in their shells and crack them as needed. Resinous Polypore. This meaty mushroom is sometimes referred to as steak of the woods. These mushrooms produce droplets of red liquid and have a slightly sweet smell. They appear on hardwood logs and trees in the fall. At an early stage of development, you can trim off the white new growth. When you cook this section of the mushroom, it will have a pleasant, melt in your mouth texture. This mushroom pairs well with steak and can be quite savory. As the mushroom becomes mature, it is too woody to be enjoyable. Hedgehog mushrooms look like a pale chanterelle at first glance. However, on the underside, the pore surface is covered with little spines. These spines are fragile and can be easily removed. They are often found in the late summer and fall. Hedgehogs are edible with a meaty texture and a mild nutty taste. Lion's mane is a popular edible and medicinal mushroom that grows in the spring and the fall. I tend to find this mushroom growing on hardwood trees in October. I sometimes find these mushrooms growing even into the winter in some of the warmer regions of the US. These white spiny mushrooms will grow on the sides of trees like American beech. In the early stages of growth, lion's mane can resemble a marshmallow growing on the sides of a tree, but as it matures, the spines will begin to develop and become longer and more distinctive. When it's fully grown, the spines will look like icicles dripping down from the mushroom. There are 3 types of Hericium in North Carolina. The standard lion's mane, bear's tooth mushroom, which spines are a little bit more fragmented, and comb's tooth mushroom, which has spines going every direction, sort of like a snowflake. Lion's mane is a highly sought after choice edible mushroom. These mushrooms have a texture similar to crab cakes and are very porous and absorb the flavor they're cooked in. Lion's mane is also known for its health benefits. This mushroom has been shown to boost brain function and mental focus. It also contains nerve growth factors that can help repair neural networks and myelin sheaths in the brain. Lion's mane is anti-inflammatory in the brain and might help with alleviating depression and anxiety. Hickory nuts start to fall in autumn and can be collected for food or drinks. Hickory nuts resemble black walnuts, but they are smaller and the husk is divided into wedges that can be easily peeled off. As the nuts fall from the tree and hit the ground, a lot of the husk will fall off from impact. When collecting hickory nuts, you want to separate the viable nuts from the bad nuts. Discard any nuts that have holes in them or are lighter than the rest. You can also do a float test by filling a bucket with water and seeing which nuts float or sink. Discard the nuts that float and keep the ones that sink. Hickory nuts are one of the tastiest nuts you can find in the forest. However, the nuts can be hard to extract from the shell. I generally use a hammer to crack the shells, but you can also use a nutcracker if you have access to that. You can eat the nuts plain, in pies, or in pancakes. You can also make a delicious nut milk from hickory as well. You can combine the broken shells and nuts into a large pot of water and simmer. The longer you steep the nuts and shells, the thicker the milk gets. This is one of my favorite beverages, and it just tastes so woodsy and sweet. Late fall oyster mushroom is a cold hardy mushroom that often grows after the first frost. I usually find these mushrooms growing on wood in early November to December. Late fall oyster mushrooms come in some strange colors like shades of green, yellow, and purple. It has distinctive yellowish gills on the underside, and there is often a line that separates the gill from the stalk. These mushrooms are thick and meaty and are great in soups. I've even cooked them in nachos before and it was really good. Wintergreen berries are one of the few fruits you can eat during a snowy winter. The tea berries are not that sweet, but they have an interesting wintergreen gum flavor to them. The leaves of wintergreen contain the same chemical in aspirin, so they are anti-inflammatory and can relieve pain. The leaves aren't edible, but you can soak them in a mason jar of water to extract their benefits. Make sure to distinguish them from partridge berry, which is another underground plant that grows in similar areas. The easiest way to ID wintergreen is to crush the leaves, and you should smell the unique minty aroma. Chaga is a black mycelium mass that grows on birch trees. Chaga is technically not a mushroom fruiting body, but a sclerotia, which is an external mycelium. Because of this, they take years to develop and should be harvested carefully. On this particular tree, there are 2 more chaga pieces on the backside that I didn't take. This allows the chaga to continue developing in the tree. Chaga is very tough and hardy, so it often takes a saw or an axe to harvest. I even use a hatchet to chop up the chaga into chunks after it's removed. Chaga isn't edible, but it makes an earthy, vanilla tasting tea and tinctures. Chaga is very high in antioxidants and is good at improving immune function and skin health. This is one of the most popular wild edibles in the Northeast. The curled crow's ear of ostrich fern is often referred to as fiddleheads. They are a choice wild edible that is served in restaurants and can sometimes even be found in supermarkets. There are a lot of lookalikes to ostrich ferns, but here are 3 distinguishing factors that separate them from the rest. Ostrich ferns have a deep inner groove along the inside of the stem. They have a brown papery covering that's easily removed, and the stems are smooth and not hairy. Fiddleheads are only edible when they're tightly curled and only a few inches off the ground. As soon as the fiddleheads start to unfurl and become an actual fern, they become inedible. For sustainably harvesting, if I find 6 fiddleheads in a node, I will only harvest 2 of them. And if I see fiddleheads that have been picked by someone else, I just pass over them. Fiddleheads should never be eaten raw, but they are delicious when they're properly cooked. Simmer the fiddleheads in water for 5 to 10 minutes, then drain. Then I like to saute them in butter with salt. And you can also add your own spices and sauces as well. The springtime growth of spruce tips are edible and are rich in vitamin C. They have a woodsy citrus taste and have a soft but crunchy texture. Spruce tips can be eaten raw, made into a syrup, or my favorite, dipped in chocolate. The new growth of other evergreen trees like fir and pine are also edible. Just make sure to avoid yew trees, which are toxic. These honeycomb-shaped mushrooms are some of the most sought-after spring fungi. They're known as morel mushrooms, and they grow on the forest floor when the soil temperature is between 45 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Morels tend to have a relationship with certain hardwood trees, specifically decaying elm, ash, apple, and tulip poplar trees in the southeastern region. They also like to grow on south-facing slopes and disturbed sites like burn areas and logging sites. To ID these mushrooms, you want to make sure the cap and stem are hollow. And on most morel species, the cap will be attached to the stem. There is one caveat, which is the half-free morel, where the bottom of the cap is not attached to the stem. But in every other morel, the cap will be attached. Morels are a choice edible mushroom that is delicious sauteed. These mushrooms should be never eaten raw, partially cooked, or with alcohol. In the springtime, I really like to combine ramps with morels. It is a delicious combination. Ramps are a pungent, spring ephemeral plant, meaning these plants come out in the mid-spring to take advantage of the forest with no leaves so they can get the full sunlight. And then as soon as the leaves fill out, they start to disappear. The word Chicago comes from a Native American name for ramps that roughly translates to stinky onion. Ramps have relatively smooth, waxy leaves that are light green in color. The leaves have an onion-like bulb that stays underground all year long. Ramps form mostly in pairs, with 2 leaves and occasionally 3. These plants often form in large, massive patches if it's a healthy population. These plants are at risk of being over-harvested over time if the proper techniques aren't being used. When harvesting these plants in the mid to late spring, I like to harvest 1 leaf from each plant and leave most of the colony alone. And then I'll come back to these ramp edges in midsummer to spread the seeds and expand the population. Ramps can be eaten raw, but I find they're best when they're cooked just slightly. Ramps can be pickled, cooked with eggs, pasta, and even pizza. But if you do eat them, you will be smelling for days. In damp regions, they can form close to a toxic plant lookalike, false hellebore. False hellebore has a similar structure to cabbage. False hellebore leaves have ridges called parallel veins that are much more distinguished than the ramp's little wrinkles. You also want to distinguish ramps from other poisonous lookalikes like lily of the valley. These jiggly ear-shaped mushrooms were traditionally used in Asian cuisine. These are wood ear mushrooms. These gelatinous mushrooms have a ton of copper and B vitamin. 1 serving of wood ear contains 30% of your copper intake for the day. Wood ear grows on dead branches, limbs, and twigs. It's best to look for wood ear after a rain because when it's been very dry for a while, wood ear mushrooms will tend to shrivel up and they'll look like raisins. You can barely see them. Wood ears are excellent for soups and stir fries, especially if you add them in with other wild edibles like garlics and ramps. Now, amber jelly roll is a more formless and translucent cousin of wood ear. This jelly fungi looks very similar, however it forms in denser clusters than wood ear and has less of an ear shape and more wrinkles. Amber jelly roll can be used in a very similar way to wood ear, so you're going to want to use it in soups, stir fries. Usually sauteing these mushrooms doesn't work too well on their own because they'll just like shrivel up. And here's a comparison of the mushrooms side by side so you can really tell a difference. Chickweed is one of the first edible greens in the forest during the springtime. These plants form in dense mats on the forest floor and they spread out horizontally. Chickweed has teardrop shaped leaves that form in opposite pairs. Chickweed has fine little hairs that form on the sides of the stem. Chickweed also has stalks that connect the leaf to the main stem called petioles. You'll want to distinguish chickweed from its poisonous lookalike scarlet pimpernel, which I cover in another video on chickweed. Chickweed is a delicious salad green that has a similar crunchy taste to sprouts. This is a very easy plant to collect in abundance because it forms in such dense clusters. It's not uncommon to find a whole forest floor covered with chickweed. This plant is also very nutrient dense with a lot of vitamin C, calcium, and iron. In addition to being a salad green, it makes an amazing pesto. These distinctive polypore mushrooms smell strongly of watermelon and cucumbers. They're known by many common names, including Dryad saddle and pheasant back. Dryad saddle grows as a shelf mushroom on hardwood trees, stumps, and logs. This mushroom is very easy to identify with its dark scales, contrasting with its cream color. It also has very unique, large, honeycomb-shaped pores on the underside. This mushroom fruits primarily in the mid-spring to early summer, but you can also find it fruiting at other times of the year as well. This mushroom also has a long stalk to hold up the mushroom because it can get very heavy as it gets large. There are no lookalikes to this mushroom, and no other mushroom smells quite like it. It is best to collect the new, tender growth of this mushroom because as the mushroom matures, it gets tough and chewy, and if you find a really big Dryad saddle, you can cut out the outer ring because the outer ring will be the new growth, and the new growth is more soft and tender than the inner growth. While the tougher parts of this mushroom might not be great to eat, they serve as a good mushroom broth base. This star-shaped plant is one of my favorite tubers and it has a refreshing and crunchy taste. These plants are known as Indian cucumber because of how similar the bulb tastes to regular cucumbers. Indian cucumber has a tall stem that has 5 to 12 leaves that form a star pattern. As it matures, the plant will form a second layer of 3 leaves above the first layer. And even later into the season, it'll form flowers above that and some berries. The rhizomes can be dug up and are edible raw or cooked. They're great as a trail nibble or added to a salad. So Indian cucumber largely reproduces underground by creating secondary rhizomes. So continually harvesting from the same colonies over and over again will probably deplete these populations. So it's better to transplant these plants and start your own colony. You also want to distinguish Indian cucumber from mayapple because mayapple also grows in similar areas and has a star-shaped leaf pattern. Mayapple's leaves, stem, and root are toxic. This vibrant orange shelf mushroom is common in the summer months. It's known as chicken of the woods because of how similar it tastes to chicken. I often find these polypores growing as early as May in western North Carolina. This mushroom is one of the foolproof 4 and is one of the easiest mushrooms to identify in the forest. The standard chicken of the woods is bright orange on the top and has small yellow pores on the underside. Chicken of the woods is a thick shelf mushroom with overlapping brackets. The common variety grows on hardwood trees, especially oak trees. White-pored sulfur shelf mushroom is another variant of chicken of the woods. The underside of this mushroom is white in color rather than yellow, and the mushroom is a little bit more peach colored than orange and tends to grow at the base of trees. All varieties of chicken of the woods taste delicious. They can be a little dry, so make sure to cook them with a lot of butter or sauce. I really like to cook them in barbecue sauce. They really soak up and absorb all the flavor. This arching plant is biblical for its starchy rhizome that has little seals that resemble the biblical seal of Solomon. This plant often grows alongside another arching plant called false Solomon seal, whereas false Solomon seal has flowers that extrude out the ends of the arching plant and no flowers underneath. However, the true Solomon seal has dangling flowers called plumes. The young shoots of true Solomon seal can be eaten like asparagus, and the potato-like rhizome can be eaten raw or it can be boiled for about 20 minutes. As an herb, Solomon seal is great for helping weak joints and muscles. It's also great for lung health and digestion. The rhizome can be roasted and used for tea, and it's great when you've been overworked and overstressed. When you're digging up the plant, you want to go from the backside and carefully dig the rhizome out. This is wood nettle, a cousin of stinging nettle. Wood nettle can grow in shady, fertile soils deep in the forest. While stinging nettle comes out early in the spring, wood nettle waits a little bit and comes out a month or two after. Wood nettle can be distinguished from stinging nettle with its alternate leaves. Stinging nettle has opposite paired leaves. Wood nettle's petioles, the stems that come off the main stem, are often longer, and wood nettle is often more top heavy, with most of its leaves clustered towards the top of the plant than stinging nettle. Wood nettle has teardrop shaped leaves with jagged edges. Despite their differences, both stinging nettle and wood nettle both have a strong sting, and some say that wood nettle has a slightly stronger sting. As wood nettle matures, it can become pretty tall, from 2 to 4 feet. You can use gloves, knives, or scissors to harvest this plant to avoid getting stung. If you do happen to get stung, it's not that painful. It just creates little welts on your skin. But if you get stung over and over again, or you roll in it, it is going to really hurt. I like to harvest the plants by cutting the upper part of the plant off and leave about 2 to 3 leaves below that, so the plant will be able to regenerate and keep living. The stinging hairs are deactivated by heat, so it's recommended that you saute, steam, or dehydrate these plants before eating them. If you want to practice some bushcraft, the inner strands of wood nettle can be made into a really strong cordage that is up to 50 times stronger than cotton. This small clover-like plant is the sweet tart of the forest. This plant is known as wood sorrel, and it has delicious tart and sour taste. This is not a substantial food, but it's more of a trail nibble to enjoy along your hike. It's best not to consume a ton of these plants anyway, because they're very high in oxalic acid. Oxalic acid can result in kidney stones if eaten too much, but it's also produced by our body, and oxalic acid is also very high in normal foods like bananas, chocolate, and nuts. If you're consuming a lot of these plants, try combining them with yogurt or raw milk, because the calcium will bind with the oxalic acid, and also the probiotics will help break down the oxalic acid in the stomach. Chanterelles are one of the tastiest wild mushrooms. These vibrant fungi smell similar to apricots and come in many different colors. In North Carolina, there are several variations of chanterelles like golden chanterelles, cinnabar chanterelles, peach chanterelles, and many others that I cover in another video. To identify chanterelles, look for false gills on the underside. False gills are more like subtle wrinkles on the underside rather than true gills, which can be detached easily. Chanterelles' inner stem should be white, contrasting with the outer color of the mushroom. They will also grow in singles and not in clusters like jack-o'-lantern. These mushrooms fruit from late June to September in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Chanterelles like to form in the shaded regions at the edge of forests, streams, and trails. Chanterelles start their life cycle as a standard button mushroom shape, but fan out into a vase shape with wavy ridges as they mature. Chanterelles are delicious when cooked, and I like to pair them with pizza, pasta, or eggs. Red clover is a common flower that you can find growing in fields and lawns. Red clover is easily identified by its cluster of tubular red flowers. The flowers are accompanied by 1 or 2 sets of clover leaves. These clover leaves contain white arrow-like markings called chevrons, and the red clover stems are hairy and hollow. Flowers, leaves, and roots of this plant are all edible. Flowers are my personal favorite and have a slight sweet taste to them. These plants have a very high percentage of protein for a plant. The red clover are preferable over white clover. There is some research that says that white clover might be toxic, but just in the southern states. I like to use the flowers in particular to top salads, pizza, and all sorts of dishes. Red clover tea is a great way to use the plant as well. Red clover is high in vitamins and minerals like calcium, magnesium, vitamin C, and potassium. Red clover has a ton of health benefits. It helps the lymphatic system, promotes healthy skin, and endocrine function, to name a few. Lobster mushroom, Hypomyces lactiflorum, is not technically a mushroom. It is a parasitic fungus that transforms existing mushrooms into a reddish-orange lobster tail. These mushrooms have a seafood smell and have a mushroomy crab taste. I usually find lobster mushrooms from July to mid-October. They are often covered with debris and leaf litter on the forest floor. They are difficult to clean because of their concave structure that allows soil to collect in the cracks. Make sure to thoroughly clean the fungi and check for slugs and bugs. Lobster fungi target specific Rusula and milk cap species, so those mushrooms will be an indicator of where to find lobsters in the woods. When lobster mushrooms are healthy, they are firm to the touch. Discard any lobsters that are soggy, soft, or falling apart. Once the mushrooms are clean, I like to cook them in a lot of butter. I use them in traditional seafood recipes like lobster rolls and lobster mac and cheese. Indigo Milk Cap is a mushroom that is found in the middle and southern portions of the Appalachian Mountains and South America. It is one of the most rare colors among mushrooms and plants. This mushroom is in the milk cap genus, so it exudes a milky latex when it's bruised or cut. The mushroom is a vivid indigo color on the underside, but has more of a pale blue color on the cap, making it surprisingly hard to spot sometimes among the leaf litter. This mushroom can be used to make an indigo dye and is associated with different trees like oak, beech, and pine. The young indigo milk cap form a flat cap with thick edges. As the fungi matures, it begins to take on more of a vase shape. The smell of indigo milk cap reminds me of fruity pebbles for some reason. Indigo milk caps are edible and have a similar texture to portobello mushrooms. They tend to change the color of the food that's cooked with them to a bluish green color. Some lookalikes include the celandine milk cap, which has a slight bluish hue, and there are a few Cortinarius species like elegant blue webcap that have similar colors. Reishi is an excellent medicinal mushroom with a long history of use. Hemlock reishi, Ganoderma tsuge, is the most common variety in eastern North America, and it grows only on hemlock trees. The mushroom starts out its life cycle as white nodes on the sides of hemlock trees and stumps in the late spring. From there, the reishi sometimes form red antlers, or they fan out into a kidney shape. In the early summer, reishi will have a rainbow pattern with red towards the center, orange, yellow, and white at the edge. The white outer edge is the only part of reishi that is soft enough to eat. The rest of reishi is very woody, but used in teas and tinctures. The white outer edge of reishi can be cut and cooked up with butter. I try to only harvest a few reishi before they start releasing their spores. As reishi matures, it will form a solid red color. The mushroom may seem dirty or dusty at this time because the spores tend to collect at the top of the mushroom. You can pour water on reishi to reveal the shiny varnish of the mushroom again. This is the ideal time to harvest reishi. The mushrooms have had a chance to spread their spores, and the beetles and mold haven't damaged them too much yet. The underside of healthy reishi will be white with barely visible pores. The key to finding reishi is locating hemlock trees. These trees are perfectly safe and not related to poison hemlock at all. Reishi tends to fruit on the same hemlock trees and logs year after year. I have the best luck finding the mushrooms in old-growth hemlock forests. Reishi is mostly known as a medicinal mushroom. It is anti-inflammatory, it can help balance the immune system, elevating mood, and calming the nervous system. This is one of my favorite mushrooms to take daily. Number 7. Crown-tip coral is a common mushroom that resembles coral in the ocean. This particular coral mushroom is distinguished from others because it has crowns, or fingers, on the top of each stem. This species grows on top of decaying wood and have a loose structure compared to other lookalikes like Romeria. Crown-tip coral have a white to off-white cream color and are easy to find in the late spring and summertime. These mushrooms are fairly brittle and can be easily picked apart. These mushrooms are edible and best cooked in soups and stir-fries. Beefsteak fungus is a unique shelf mushroom that looks similar to raw meat. This mushroom grows mostly on oak and chestnut trees. In its early stages, it'll look like a pink tongue coming out of the tree. As it matures, it'll fan out into this kidney shape and turn a deep red color. I usually find this mushroom in July, August, and September. This mushroom has an acidic, citrus-like taste, and the texture is similar to meat. When you cut into this and look at the inner flesh of the mushroom, it even looks like raw meat. This mushroom is one of the few you can eat raw, but I prefer it cooked. Old Man of the Woods is a dark edible bolete that is easy to identify. These mushrooms are a grayish black color with dark scales. These caps have a spongy texture and have a gray porous underside. They have a woody stem with shaggy dark scales. These are a polarizing edible mushroom. Some people love them and others hate them. They have a mushy, melt-in-your-mouth texture that I would describe as similar to a fudgy brownie. These flowers with the frosted tops are known as mountain mint. These plants have square stems and are in the mint family. They are easily identified by their silver leaves towards the top of the plant. This is an edible plant that can be used as a minty seasoning. It's also used herbally as a tea and as an insect repellent. The flower buds and the leaves of this plant are edible. Stronger teas of this plant are good for treating wounds and for tooth and gum health. Cauliflower mushroom is an unusual fungi that grows at the base of trees and stumps. They have a loose, wavy structure that is similar to egg noodles. The mushroom is edible and has a similar texture to pasta or noodles. Cauliflower is very tasty in stir-fries and soups. Turkey tail, Trametes versicolor, is not an edible mushroom, but it is an excellent medicinal mushroom that you can use to make teas and tinctures with. Turkey tail are available year-round, but the new growth starts in mid-summer. I generally collect turkey tails in the summer and fall because that's when they are most fresh. Turkeytails have a lot of lookalikes, but they can easily be distinguished using 3 identification factors. Number 1, the mushroom should be paper thin with a velvety surface with varying bands of color. Number 2, turkeytails should be bendable without breaking. And the 3rd identifying factor is a white underside with barely visible pores. The pore surface is also a good indicator to assess the health of the mushroom. As turkeytails age, they will develop blemishes on the underside, so I try to look for a solid white underside. Turkeytails can come in a variety of alternating colors, including brown, blue, and gray. They grow mostly on decaying hardwood, logs, trees, and stumps. After I harvest turkeytail mushrooms, I dry them and save them for teas and tinctures. Turkeytails are good for boosting the immune system, improving gut flora, and are antiviral. I use them whenever I start to feel sick. Goldenrod is a harbinger of autumn and is unfairly blamed for seasonal allergies. Goldenrod leaves and flowers are edible and medicinal. The leaves can be cooked like spinach or added to soups or salads. And despite what you've heard, these bright yellow flowers are actually good for seasonal allergies. Their antihistamine effects can dial back the headaches and sinus congestion of allergy season. Goldenrod is also anti-inflammatory and can help with urinary tract infections and kidney health. Black trumpets are a fragrant dark mushroom found on the forest floor. They form in a horn shape with a hollow interior. They are a black dark brown color, but they can also become gray as they age or dry. These mushrooms are thin with no true gills, only slight wrinkles on the sides. Black trumpets are common, but they're often difficult to spot because how easily they blend in with the leaf litter. Black trumpets prefer rich, moist soil and love to grow in patches of moss. Black trumpets are one of my favorite culinary mushrooms, and they have a taste and fragrance that is kind of similar to truffles. These mushrooms were commonly used in Italian cuisine and are excellent with pasta and pizza. These mushrooms also retain their flavor nicely after dehydrating. Dried black trumpets are great for making salts, spices, and flavoring pastes. Resinous Polypore is an overlooked edible mushroom. These mushrooms can be quite flavorful, however they are chewy and can be a workout for your jaw muscles. They are a creamy white mushroom that grows in rosettes near tree stumps. If you rip or bruise this mushroom, they will stain black within 10 to 15 minutes. This is the easiest way to identify these mushrooms and distinguish them from others. These mushrooms can get woody as they age, so it's best to harvest the new growth or the outer edges of the older growth. Black staining polypore are very stringy, so I like to pull them apart and cook them with onions and barbecue sauce. They have a similar taste to pulled pork, but a little bit chewier. These mushrooms form giant fairy rings around trees. They are known as honey mushrooms for their golden brown color, and they appear in the late summer in the southern regions. In the northern climates, they'll emerge in the fall. These mushrooms are a parasite that breaks down the roots of trees, and you often find them growing around the base of hardwoods. This is a great mushroom to collect in bulk because it's so prolific during its season. I can easily walk out of the forest with 5 to 10 pounds of honey mushrooms when they're in season. Now this can be a tricky mushroom to identify, but here are some tips. You want to look for yellow to brown caps with little hairs and scales on the top. They have white gills on the underside, and it also has a ring around the stem because it's a leftover from the partial veil it has when it's just developing. These mushrooms grow in large clusters, often encircling a tree. If you take a spore print, they'll have white spores. One caveat, there's also another species called ringless honey mushroom, which grows in the grass and doesn't contain that ring, so that can be a little confusing. The taste and texture of honey mushrooms are most similar to shiitake. Now honey mushroom does have a poisonous lookalike, deadly galerina. These mushrooms will grow scattered instead of clustered like honey mushrooms, and they're most common in the spring and in the fall. So if you find a mushroom that looks like honey mushrooms, but you found it in the springtime, it's probably deadly galerina, and you want to leave that one alone. These are smaller in size, and they have a rusty brown color and a rusty brown spore print. Now, honey mushrooms have a white spore print. Shrimp of the woods is a unique fungus that emerges after honey mushrooms. These fungi are a combination of entoloma and honey mushrooms, in which the entoloma parasitizes the honey mushrooms, and together they form these strange nuggets called shrimp of the woods. You'll find these mushrooms oozing out of decaying trees and growing on the ground out of tree roots. These mushrooms appear in the late summer and fall, around the same time that honey mushrooms fruit. So checking on patches of honey mushrooms is the key to finding shrimp of the woods. Shrimp of the woods tend to look like packing peanuts with no gills, stem, or cap. You want to collect the shrimps when they're white and not brown on the inside or outside. Shrimp of the woods have a mild flavor, but a firm texture. They are excellent at absorbing flavor from spices and sauce. These mushrooms are best when they're browned or fried. They are great in Asian stir-fry dishes or seafood recipes. I make extracts from wild chaga, reishi, and lion's mane, and they're available on my shop.